It's only right that we wait till the end of the 7 rounds. All 257 picks have occurred, and we're not wasting any time. We're getting our thoughts right out there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another edition of your favorite NFL podcast that has been sweeping the nation for the past 3+ years. We're not sure which parts of the nation. We know we have a couple listeners in Maryland. We can confirm that. From there, TVD, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. Opening up the proceedings, per usual, is the Iceman, myself, Jerg, and joining me, and we have very close, little pink and red action going on here. Joining me on the screen on this one, the Podfather himself, Rick. Rick, how are we doing?
Please bring up my lower third, if you don't mind.
Yes. Let me clear. And look at that. Ominous for tonight.
Well, it's only fitting and only right that after 256 picks and after 3 long days of the NFL draft that I'm drinking on the podcast tonight. So here we go.
One of the cardinal rules have been broken in the podcast history.
Such a cardinal rule, but I don't care. Hard cranberry lemonade. Let's have some fun.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are here to have a bit of fun on this one, to say the very least. As you could tell by the title of the episode, there's several big topics for us to discuss here tonight. We're going to talk about, I think a good amount of the discussion will center around the first round, some of our reaction to picks, early trade. Rick, there was no time wasted in terms of after the first selection was made and some trades happening in the draft. And a couple trades that happened later in the draft that we'll definitely have a couple thoughts on and conversations about. But before we get to that, everyone knows the tagline of the show, and if you're not, well, welcome for the first time. But the tagline is, of course, fun, football, and chaos. Let's start by having a little bit of fun. Podfather, it's been a while since we did one of these, mainly because, life is kind of hectic. But give us your dad joke of the week.
So, one of my favorite things to do is play board games. I'm sure, everyone loves board games. They know how to basically play all the fun ones. There's Sorry, there's Candyland, Settlers of Catan. One of my favorite games is Clue. Unfortunately, I was married into a family with a lot of police officers and detectives. So you can't play Clue with them. Do you know why?
Why? Because did they figure it out so fast?
Well, they'll know the murder weapon within minutes, making it a briefcase.
That was a good one. that was a good one. That is on the level, because remember, was it this past Halloween or the Halloween before where Justin had the double costume?
Yes, just in time and just in case.
Yes, that's called that. We still, it still upsets me that there was never any photos or videos of that full costume that we got.
If only he had some friends or a championship trophy that could stand in as like a photographer for it.
If only you could. The trophy would be like the perfect thing. Set the phone against it. Set the timer on. Boom.
One day soon.
Alas, not meant to be yet. Who knows? Maybe this next season. Maybe this will be his Cody Rhodes story, or maybe he's going to turn heel on us, and this will be his John Cena moment. You never know.
Oh boy!
At the very least, but great dad joke of the week there, Podfather. Definitely got the people churning and laughing on that one. At least I did.
Or pulling their eyes in pain and misery. One of the two.
Probably that one. I have. For our family that watches the show, I mean, I can only imagine how many dad jokes you've made to the pod wife and your various family members.
Oh, she hates them. But I know. But then why buy me a dad joke calendar for Christmas if you're fulfilling the ego and playing into the game here? But
with that being said, that's one game that we bring back. Now for another one, ladies and gentlemen, because it's been a bit. Some of these episodes we've had to kind of go fast, especially the mock draft last week, because Lord knows it was 3+ hours.
Yeah.
But we are bringing back, of course. Don't worry, I think we have had it at least once or twice this season. Another edition of, even if it's without Justin, name that player. There. So the Podfather and I both each have a NFL. Well, I didn't tell him it was draft related, but we both have NFL draft related name that players to give. Mine is. I think you'll probably get it after round 2, to say the very least.
All right.
You might get it after round 1 if you know enough about where this player was born.
That's fine.
to say the least. But do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Why don't you go first? You were the one that brought up the idea in the first place. So go ahead.
All right. So let's do this. And we're knocking off 2 names from Justin's very, 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 very long list of potential names.
You see what happens when you're not here, Justin? We take away your list for you.
Exactly. Now he only has like
792.
I was going to say 1,252 more names to pick from, but
525,600 minutes.
Exactly. So, and for those unfamiliar with it, 3 rounds of hints and guesses in order to get for one of us to name that player. It's in the name. Some things on the show are kind of bare bones, ladies and gentlemen. Forgive us. Our crack production team can only do so much in a short amount of time on certain occasions. All right. So, Rick, my first round of guesses for my side of the name that player. This is going to be a very fun one, to say the very least. Again, I think there's a fair chance you may get it on the first try here. This Florida-born player stayed in the state of Florida for his pre-NFL career. He played his high school ball in Florida, and he even stayed at home to play his college ball in Florida before he inevitably was drafted in the top 5 of his respective draft year. And fun fact, never played for a Florida team in the NFL. So there's that. But just because he wasn't in his home state in the pros, that didn't stop him from having a absolutely phenomenal, what ended up being a pro football Hall of Fame career. So that's the first guess. Did I say how many teams he played for?
No.
Okay, he played for, because this also will help you out slightly. He played for 5 teams in his career.
I see.
So born in the state, to recap for the people, born in the state of Florida, stayed in Florida for his high school and college ball, never played for a Florida-based NFL team, but still a Hall of Famer, played for 5 teams. That's almost 2 rounds worth of hints, some would say. But for our game, sometimes that's actually kind of 1.
Yeah. See, I had a good enough guess up until you said Hall of Fame, and up until you said 5 teams. Because a name jumped into my head, and it's funny. Like, one of the things that that I like to do is I like to go back and listen to our old shows from way back when and way back in the day. And sometimes I throw out a random name as a first guess just because it speaks to me. Well, when you said born in Florida, high school Florida, college Florida, and we're talking about draft, and you mentioned top 5, I believe, top 5 pick?
Yes.
In the draft class? The first thing that stuck out to me was a guy that I don't know if you remember him playing in the NFL, because he had a very short-lived career in the NFL, but he was a very prolific wide receiver in college. Maybe a little before your time, but I mean, it definitely was in your time, but it's not the answer. But I'm going to give him a shout out because I think it's a good shout out for a guy who was the 4th overall pick of the 2000 NFL draft, Florida State alum Peter Warrick.
Ooh, what a throwback name.
How about that?
Peter Warrick was a solid player in his time as well.
Great player.
I do not blame you at all for your brain going there, to say the very least. No, not a bad guess. Not Peter Warrick. But you're kind of on the case there, because this is the next round of hints. And this is where I think you'll get this definitively, to say the very least.
Okay.
But this player is a FSU alum. And like I said, he ultimately did not play for any Florida-based team in his career. But that didn't stop him from eventually coming back and giving back in football to the state of Florida, because he did eventually coach in Florida in and of itself. Because this gentleman eventually became a collegiate coach in the CFB ranks after his successful NFL career. He came back to the sport and is now presently coaching in college, which, I mean, is only right considering he wasn't just an NFL Hall of Famer or a Pro Football Hall of Famer, Rick. He was a college football Hall of Famer. So multi-Hall of Fame player now coaching in CFB. I think it's pretty obvious who it is at this point.
I'm assuming that one of his sons got drafted very late in this year's draft.
I don't know.
And one of his other sons just got signed as an undrafted free agent by a Florida-based team. So I'm going to go with the greatest head coach to ever adorn the sidelines for Jackson State University. And that would be one primetime Deion Sanders.
Yeah, basically. I didn't really have a third round of hints to give you, so I was just like, yeah, let me just give it to him on the second.
That's all right. That's a good one, though. Yeah, I mean it's very relevant. So hats off to you for that.
I guess I could have
I
known maybe the multi-sport athlete when he was younger.
Yeah, I didn't think that Peter Warwick would get me so close to the answer, but good on him. So, and yeah, it's interesting to think that he never actually played for a Florida team. But there you go.
Right, all things considered, especially when you think of the fact that like in between his last two teams, when he played for the Reskins in 2000 and then the Ravens in 04-05, there's that multi-year gap in there.
There is.
like Dion, what are we doing?
What are we doing, pal? Yeah, what are we doing, pal?
Yeah, I mean, he was on the as they say, he had abruptly retired after playing for 1 year, which I mean, to be fair, I think anybody would retire after 1 year of dealing with Dan Snyder as well. So
I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. But he got paid though. So
yes, he did.
You win some, you lose some. All right, that was my quick rendition of Name That Player. What is your probably much more prepared rendition of Name That Player?
It's not that much prepared, but it is something that does speak a little volume. So I'm gonna go with more of a vague first round of clues here. This member of the 2009 draft class played his college ball at University of South Carolina, where he was a two-time second-team All-SEC player and will later become a three-teamer in the pros, Super Bowl champion, and Pro Football Writers Association All-Rookie Team member in 2009.
See, 09 is definitely in my wheelhouse because that's just one of those draft classes where we're paying attention to the sport. It comes to that. So you said went to South Carolina, drafted in 09. What was the last part?
Two-time All-SEC, Super Bowl champion, and Pro Football Writers Association All-Rookie Team member in 09.
All-Rookie Team member. Okay, 2009, 2009. I got to like start at the top of the class to help me out there. So 09 was the Matthew Stafford year, right? Or was that 08?
That was 08.
Oh.
No, 08 was Matt Ryan.
Okay.
That was not year yet.
Okay, so I'm trying to think. So 09, you had great. I mean, your former team, the Sanchez. He's not my guess, but there's Mark Sanchez, who is in that draft class as well. Darius Haywood Bay, BJ Raji, guys like that. For a South Carolina kid to come out, be all-rookie team in what feels like a pretty stacked, maybe not stacked, let's say, but like at least a solid draft class, to say the very least. There have been a number of South Carolina Gamecock players to make it to the league. And in terms of around the late 2000s, early 10s era, I don't think he's the answer because I don't know if he necessarily got going right away in his career. But I do remember him just because he was at one point on a team that I very much critiqued, plenty of, which only narrows down the list a certain amount here on the show. Slightly. Yeah, so slightly. But he was on the Rams for a bit. He was a Packer, caught a very infamous pass to help beat the Cowboys one year. South Carolina alumni, Jared Cook will be my first guess, but I'm not confident. I only know I think that's his draft year, and I know he went to South Carolina. We're stretching from there.
Jared Cook is a solid guess, but it is not the answer we're looking for, unfortunately. Here's round 2.
Okay.
So I mentioned that he won a Super Bowl.
Yes.
In doing so, he became the first player that was drafted in his draft position. So like the number that he was drafted.
Yeah.
The first player drafted at that number to play and win the Super Bowl as a starter and an active player. And may I mention as well that this draft position was number 256.
256.
Which thereby made him that year's Mr. Irrelevant.
Okay. So that definitely helps because I remember the whole thing with being the first Mr. Irrelevant. Because it's like a big thing when the last pick in the draft actually has a career.
Mm-hmm. And this guy had a career.
Clearly, to say the least. I think I know who it is, but I kind of want to bring us to the last round of hints for fun. Although I don't know if you're in a similar case like me, where your third round of hints is basically, "Hey, this is what he did," and how obvious it'll be. You see, had you not mentioned Mr. Irrelevant, I definitely would have stretched it because I feel like the Mr. Irrelevant selection has kind of bounced around because of all the in recent years the supplemental picks. Like Mr. Irrelevant has kind of like really gone back and forth on what pick it is now.
Sure.
It used to confidently be in like the 250s for a bit.
Yep.
I mean, I'll just put the people out of it because I know who this is because I mean, we definitely talked about this in our time when we worked together, to say the very least. But the 2009 draft, Mr. Irrelevant, who would win a Super Bowl, ladies and gentlemen, from that position, started and won Ryan Suckup.
Ryan Suckup, yes, the greatest place kicker to be the Mr. Irrelevant of all time. My third hint was gonna be about his kicking stats, but this is an interesting one too. This doubles as mind blowing, I think, as well.
Mm.
In the 2020 playoffs, when he won the Super Bowl with Tampa Bay, he was 9 for 9 on field goal attempts and 12 of 13 on extra points. In his playoff career, he made 94% of his field goals, 16 of 17, and was 28 of 29
Wow.
on extra points.
So just the one extra point he missed in his playoff career.
And it was in that season.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty damn good.
I was going to say, because Suckup, he was drafted by the Chiefs.
He was drafted by the Chiefs.
And he missed out on the Mahomes era.
Spent 5 years there, then spent 6 years with your beloved Tennessee Titans.
Oh, see, there's always a freaking connection to them.
Before, in his last season, I think, got hurt in 2019. So then he got signed by Tampa Bay. He won the Super Bowl in 2020. The following year, he had a down year field goal kicking, 25 of 30, but made 56 of 59 extra points, which was his records. And then finished his career 31 of 38, 24 of 25 on the PATs, 83% on field goals, 96% on extra points. And interestingly enough, one last little factoid too for you. As a freshman, he was the number 2 kicker on the depth chart behind another NFL alum, Josh Brown.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, South Carolina produced a couple kickers there in the 2000s.
Not so bad. Not so bad.
Impressive. I was going to say, fun fact with that 09 draft, with you mentioning a kicker, let's keep it up with the special teams. This will direct to a guy who covered this past NFL draft and has covered multiple.
It was
drafts,
also on the PWFA All-Rookie team.
The man, the myth, the legend, Pat McAfee. Or McAfee, as some people like to jokingly pronounce his name as.
They're done.
They're done. Oh, wow, what a 2009! What a draft class, eh?
It was.
That was a strong class. That's always that's definitely going to be a. We missed the boat on it because last year would have been like the 15-year anniversary of that draft class. But like, if we're still doing this in 2029, we could do the 20-year anniversary.
I mean, you want to talk about the all-rookie team here. We can just run through it quickly because, we got all the time in the world for us. Sanchez was your all-rookie quarterback.
Right, because Stafford was basically hurt the entire year.
Your running backs were Noshawn Marino and Beanie Wells.
Oh, I forgot Beanie Wells. See, Beanie Wells, I don't know. He's a guy who I misplace his career. I could have sworn he was an early 2000s.
Nah, he was a late 2000s guy, but he tore his Achilles tendon with the Ravens and did not return in 2013.
Poor guy.
Your wide receivers, one of whom doubled as your kickoff returner, Percy Harvin, of course. And Austin Collie.
Percy Harvin, a very popular selection in my name that player guesses.
Yeah, right. Yep. Austin Collie was your other one. Brendan Pettigrew was your tight end. Alex Mack was the center. Yeah.
Such a good player.
Luis Vasquez and Andy Levitri were your guards. Tackles were Phil Lodeholt and Michael Orr from the blind side, of course.
Wow. Phil Lodeholt, he had a decent spell. What team was he on again?
He was on the Vikings for 6 years.
That's right.
And now he's the current O-line coach at Mississippi State.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah, good for him. Defense, your D-line, it was a 4-3-4. Your D-line included the aforementioned B.J. Raji, of course, Matt Shaughnessy of the Raiders, Terrence Knighton of the Jaguars,
wow.
Big Terrence Knighton, and a certain somebody by the name of Tyson Jackson for the Chiefs. But the linebackers are where you make your money with this rookie team. Brian Cushing.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Brian Arakpo.
Dude, I would trade for him in every single Madden game when he was at his peak.
And the man who had the starring role at the very beginning of Thursday night's draft, Clay Matthews. Mm-hmm.
Greatness.
Yeah. Cornerbacks were Jacob Lacey of the Colts, who I think was okay, but his counterpart was better, Vontae Davis.
Yep.
And then your safeties were Jarius Byrd and Louis Delmas.
Well.
Suckup, McAfee, Harvin, Quan Cosby, the punt returner, and your special teams, your other guy who had a very, very short career, but somebody who I think, we looked at in Sporkle, I think, once because he was the kickoff return leader in 2010, the Rod Stevens Howland.
Wow.
Yeah. It was like the Matthew Slater that year.
Yeah, basically. Matthew Slater took a year off.
I got to say, looking back at that class, that linebacker trio, so good.
We could literally, and this will probably be like an idea for us for maybe one of the like filler episodes that we do, because we did filler episodes last year. We'll probably have to end up doing that again this year.
We will.
We could spend multiple hours, whether it's us two or including Justin, of just going through like what was the 2005 like All Pro first team, the 2012 Pro Bowl rosters, like just random years and going through various things like that. Just who led the league in like 1999 in each category, like stuff like that is where you have some throwbacks.
Well, remember too that was all rookie team. All you have to do is think all rookie team, and when you get to certain years, you're like, oh boy, that's how bad it was. Prime example. You know who the all rookie 05 quarterback was?
So the 2005 quarterback, was it? The only quarterback I could think from that draft class is Matt Leinart.
Kyle Orton.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yep.
Was Matt Leinart even in 05, or was he like...
No, 06? Matt Leinart was 06 because that was the Vince Young year.
Oh, that's right.
Although, when you get past Vince Young, the rest of that class is insane. Shall I?
I'm torn because it's time to talk to the next one, but I kind of want to real quick.
Running backs: Reggie Bush and MJD, Maurice Jones-Drew.
Oh my God, that is amazing.
Wide receivers: Greg Jennings, Marcus Colston.
Nice.
Tight end: Owen Daniels.
He was good for a while. He's very underrated.
Here was your offensive line: DeBrickashaw Ferguson, Marcus McNeil.
Oh my God.
Jari Evans.
Oh my God.
Darren College. Nick Mangold.
Bro. Holy shit.
Here and here's your defense. Starting with Mark Anderson and Barry Cofield. Yeah, but it's the middle guys. Tamba Hali.
Oh yeah.
Haloti Nata. And once again,
Tamba Hali's one of those like forgotten to history.
Oh yeah, big time. And once again, this cuts to your linebackers. Ernie Sims in the middle.
Okay.
AJ Hawk. And D'Amico Ryans.
Wow.
Corners, Richard Marshall and Ty Hill. But your safeties, DeJuan Landry.
Okay.
And Dante Whitner. Place kicker, Steven Goskowski.
Oh, Gosh.
Punter Ryan Plackmeyer from the Seahawks.
He deserves a lot of credit. Steven Gostkowski had to follow up Adam Vinatieri's shoes.
He does.
And that is not an easy thing to do.
Special teamer Bernard Pollard of the Chiefs.
Oh.
And I skipped over the kick returner, the punt returner, because it's your boy, the newest Hall of Famer, Devin Hester.
Wow.
Oh. And with that, let's talk about 2025.
Let's get to it, ladies and gentlemen. The 2025 NFL Draft came and went over the last 72 to 96 hours. It felt like a fortnight at times because, Jesus, it felt like some picks it took a while. Even
not that kind of fortnight.
No, not the garbage kind of fortnight.
Yeah, exactly.
The original meaning of fortnight, ladies
Exactly.
and gentlemen. But the NFL Draft in 2025 was pretty interesting, to say the very least. It was pretty active overall, especially active in the first round. We brought back the tradition of going against what the first overall pick was when we did our mock last week. Cam Ward was selected first overall. Don't think there was ever going to be an actual question about that ultimately. But what ended up happening, which was, first off, shout out Cam Ward going first overall rather than in the 20s in our mock A. Maybe he would have preferred going to the Rams or Niners instead, but but very cool stuff early on in that so far. He seems very down to earth. I love the people that have been rating his draft outfit and his showing up to Titans introductory presser fits. Just very basic. He's not overly it's not overly designer made and initials and all that garbage, special lining in between. Dude had a straight up suit, straight up attire, very smooth, and an ultimate gesture from the Titans organization and franchise as a whole. Warren Moon coming to give him the jersey number to allow him to wear that. That's a very kind gesture from him and from the organization to give that to the young kid. They're really going all in with him, and I do like to see that. I think on that, Rick, I think I'm going to shock some people here. Tennessee Titans. I don't know how much I really can hate them anymore. That was a pretty classy move. I think the Tennessee Titans, even though I still sometimes make jokes about them, I think the Titans may almost just be off of the jerk hate tier. Or maybe they're in the EF tier of we used to have a rivalry, but now not so much anymore. They're not really hating on them anymore, to say the very least. They've had a great weekend, to say the very least. Of course, the highlight being our eternal feud is finally ended. Of course.
I mean that's the only highlight you need to know, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, listen. Conjecture is conjecture. I made that first pick just to kind of get a buzz going. We all knew it was going to be Cam Ward. And let's talk about it for a second here. I mean, the kid had a prolific college career at 3 different stops. Started off at Incarnate Word in Texas. Shout out to the Cardinals over there. Then Washington State, where he played really well for 2 years. And then ended up in Miami, where he was basically the sole reason that the Hurricanes were not a doormat. He was a very good player down there. Passing the ball primarily. 4,300 yards passing, 39 touchdowns, and rushing not so much. So he was kind of your pocket passer who had a lot of mechanical here and there's. And, one of the things that was a knock on him, which continues to be a knock on him, I think, which I know you lambasted about last week, was the idea of doing too much in a way. And I think in Tennessee, he's still going to be charged with doing too much. When you pick a quarterback number 1, you obviously anoint them to become the savior of your franchise. And it's hard to say that Cam Ward's going to be able to do everything that can be done to bring the Titans back to relevancy. But based upon what was there, was the best option possible for them. So you can't hate the pick. He was very understated, very, very good young athlete. And listen, we'll see what happens. I mean, there probably will be a fake competition at camp between him and Will Levis, which we all know Cam Ward's going to win. Because if Cam Ward doesn't win the competition at camp, one of two things would happen. Either Will Levis spiked his coffee with something else, or he got hurt. It's very simple.
Or it could just be, and I mean, we need to wait for the official schedule. And look, maybe sometimes some guys need time. You throw Will Levis out to the Wolves for 4 games, so let Cam Ward watch on the sideline, and then he just takes over. You never know.
Well, you got to really know if you're Tennessee what your expectations are this year.
Yeah.
And in a division where the Texans are ruling the roost and the Jaguars made some moves and the Colts made some moves, what's your ceiling?
Yeah.
6 wins, maybe. You know,
I think that'd be ideal after this.
I'd say so. I'd say that's ideal.
If you could get 6 wins overall, maybe you steal 1 or 2 in the division, like be a headache. Like all you could ask for, I think, in the first 2 years with the Cam Ward era here is if you could be a little bit of a headache for the teams in your division, like be the game in 2025 that costs one of them a chance at the division crown.
Yeah.
If you can beat that game, that's what you're asking for at this point. Because it kind of felt like, I know they didn't go over, obviously, but like it kind of felt like they were a doormat 99% of the season last year. It really did.
Well, that's because all you remembered about the Titans last year were any time that Will Levis made a mistake, the meme-like reactions that he would have, and how that would just be glorified and just like made fun of constantly because
yes,
well, it's easy to make fun of Will Levis.
And that is the most tragic thing of Will Levis no longer being a starting quarterback in this league. The memes next season, for the next NFL season, we're gonna be looking for a new golden boy. It's tough.
Yeah.
You can't replace the kind of generational meme run that Will Levis had for us in the 2024 season, and we respect and appreciate it. We'll miss it, to say the very least. So, I mean, I was hoping Will Levis would be traded to the Steelers this whole time, so maybe he could give it a shot there, but it's not meant to be. But no, in all seriousness, it should be very interesting to see what the Titans can do as they build up that team. Look, if Cam Ward can get Treylon Burks to be a 1,000-yard receiver somehow, is he not the Rookie of the Year?
Well, the person.
Well, I said that. Is Treylon Burks still on the team?
Yes, he is. But,
okay.
but will he be Rookie of the Year? The person who drafted after Cam Ward might have something to say about that, I believe.
Yes, you mentioned AFC South teams making moves, Rick. The Jacksonville Jaguars wasted no time. After the first overall pick was made, a deal was struck. The Cleveland Browns traded the second overall pick. They traded out of the pick, which realistically, that was one of the, and we'll talk about the idea and concept of draft day, not day, just day of the draft, but rumors and such like that, because I feel like every single time we get to the draft, we have to talk about the media circus that is the draft and all that stuff. But one of the believable things was that either the Giants or the Browns were going to be intrigued, depending on what would happen of trading out. And the Browns proved that true because they traded out. They traded with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They traded their second overall pick, the 104th overall pick, and the 200th overall pick in this class in exchange to Jacksonville. They got the first, second, and fourth rounders from this year, so 5, 36, and 126. And this is the kicker, Rick. A team that had to trade a lot for Deshaun Watson, right? They got the Jags' 2026 first-round pick. Now, a couple years ago, a certain cat team that moved up to 1 overall traded their first-round pick the next year. That became the first overall pick. Jacksonville's going to have to tread lightly here, to say the very least. There's not going to be too much margin for error when it comes to giving up a future first-round pick. You better be confident that the player you're selecting will make a difference. Clearly, they believe it because along with Liam Cohen, Duval, and Trevor Lawrence, Travis Hunter, drafted second overall. Rick, I'm not surprised he went second. I'm not surprised someone traded up for him to get to the second overall pick. But if you're Jacksonville now, we were just talking about the AFC South. There's some pressure now this year because you can't let the first overall pick next year be too high of a selection now for the Browns. But what do you think of the impact that Travis Hunter could end up making in Jacksonville?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what they do with his skill set. Travis Hunter does play both sides of the ball. And I know in the early going, I believe they want him to line up more as a wide receiver, which I think is ideal because you line him up immediately alongside Brian Thomas, who was the darling of last year's draft, and you've got a two-headed monster for Trevor Lawrence to work with on the offensive side of the ball. Now, what would that mean for his defensive prowess? Because he does like playing on both sides of the ball. He doesn't like sitting on the bench at all. Well, I think that's kind of where, you have to take a modicum of solace if you're Travis Hunter. Just understand that it's a different level when you get to the NFL than it is when you're playing in the Big 12 and dealing with all of that. So I think when you look at the makeup of the Jaguars, you have Christian Braswell, you have Tyson Campbell, Jordan Lewis, Jarian Jones. I know they drafted another corner as well. They drafted Caleb Ransaw a little bit later on. It screams to me that Travis Hunter could be a quarterback one on this team as well. It does scream that to me. But I think the idea is to keep him lower on the depth chart as a corner for the moment, which I think will preserve him in the long run. But to your point, you give up a 2026 first rounder. Now, part of that I think is also because of the fact that I think they are set solid straight in Trevor Lawrence being their quarterback of the future and their quarterback of now.
They kind of had no choice.
You have no choice, but also you want to see a bounce back year from him this year, obviously, because that's ultimately where it's going to rise and fall. If the Jags have a good enough season where they're 9-8, let's say, miss the playoffs, but it's still a mid-tier, mid-first round selection that they give up to Cleveland, you're not angry about it. It's depth, but you're not angry about it. If you have a chance, if your team goes 2-15 and you have the number one overall pick, and now Cleveland is the number one overall pick, you're going to be angry about it, and heads are going to roll. But the interesting dichotomy on that, too, is for Cleveland. What are they going to do with that? So, but for Jacksonville's sake, and what's interesting is that on some depth charts, they list Hunter as a corner strictly. So here's how you look at it. You took a guy at number 2 who can play wide receiver or corner. But if it was a wide receiver solely at number 2, I think we'd all say that's a pretty high pick for a wide receiver. If it was a cornerback solely, we'd say it's a pretty high selection for just a corner. Names that come to mind for me: Charles Rogers. That was a pretty high selection for it and didn't work out for them. And oh god, what's the guy's name that I'm thinking of? Justin Blackmon.
Justin Blackmon to me is my personal disheartening thing. I wanted no player to succeed more in the early 2010s than Justin Blackmon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could not get. I firmly believed that Justin Blackmon was going to be the guy for years to come in the NFL. Mm-hmm. I believed he had that everything you would have wanted in the perfect archetype of receiver. I thought it was him. He's too much of a bonehead, though, to say the very least.
Yeah. That's a problem.
Because you take yourself off of the field, you don't get to stay in game shape. Those reps matter, man. Those reps matter. But no, it is going to be interesting. Kind of like you said, it's like the whole shtick here. I don't know if this is what you're about to get into, but the whole idea of Travis Hunter and I don't know if the Jags GM, who looks like a teenager.
I know. It's weird. It's really weird.
Seriously, I think I'm fairly certain he's older than the both of us, but it doesn't look like it. But it talked about the allure of Travis Hunter being that guy to break the mold in the NFL, and him basically being the Ohtani for the league right now. And we saw last season when Ohtani was forced to only do one thing. He did that one thing pretty well, eh? I think he still won the NL MVP award just by solely focusing on hitting home runs and not pitching.
Correct.
He's back to it this year. But I think even the Dodgers kind of understand in baseball, they're probably going to have to at some point make him do one or the other. I think that's going to have to be part of the future conversations for Jacksonville. Of at some point, Travis Hunter, maybe he could pull it off for a 1 to 2 season stretch. I think it's possible, but he's not going to have a 12 to 15 year career doing both, because that's absolutely at the end of the day. When you draft a second overall pick, even if they technically don't live up to being the second overall pick, at least if you could say they stayed in the league for 12 to 15 years, there's a little bit of, okay, at least they lasted, etc., right? If he tries to do both, I don't even know if he makes it to year 10.
Well, I don't think he does as well, but here's an interesting thing, too. Well, part A and part B. Part A is that I love when life imitates art. You know that at this time of the year, everyone talks about the movie Draft Day with Kevin Costner. Well, okay. But do you remember what one of the trades was that was made in that movie?
There were a lot of bad ones.
No. The Browns traded all their seconds to the Jaguars, and what was the conversation? Jaguars have a new GM. He's young. He's not going to know any better.
That's true.
Exactly. That's what happened, basically, if you think about it. The Jags traded away a first-rounder for Cleveland because they didn't know any better. But the second thing that I think is really interesting about it is that, and he's not a two-way player, but who is the last player that you can think of that tried to come into the NFL and play two different positions and it didn't work out? Because I have a guy in mind.
When you say two different positions, like, because I immediately go to like the guys that people have tried to make the Swiss Army knives on defense the last couple of years, like.
But remember, this is a guy who came into the league, who played two different positions in college. Not a guy who they tried to switch to. Not an Isaiah Simmons mold.
Oh wait, Jabril Peppers.
Mm-hmm. And how did that work out for him?
Not well.
Exactly. So when you get to the NFL, if they want to switch you in a different position, that's one thing. But if you come in from college saying, I can play safety and linebacker, it's like, that's nice, but you ain't going to do that here.
Yeah, right.
So,
Travis
Hunter wins a Heisman, and it's like, I can play wide receiver and corner. That's nice. You ain't going to do that here.
Yeah. You're really not, especially with the Jacksonville Jaguars, like where that team is ranked within its like medical facilities, especially the last couple of years. I don't know if you want to risk injury there, to say the very least. I think that's the last team.
Crimea River.
I think that's the last team you want to try to risk an injury for, to say the very least. So there's that. We will get to the Giants here. I do want to circle back to the Giants because it is worth noting what they did in the first round, not just with the third overall pick, where they got what most would probably say is the best player in the draft. Maybe some would argue at the third overall pick.
Our number one.
Exactly. Our number one guy. Just to run through a couple ones. We're going to go back and forth a bit. Eventually the run came a little bit more later to an extent, but it was very like subtle at the beginning. There was a couple picks in between these guys. Rick, we talked about it during the mock draft. I think we probably mentioned it the episode before the mock. But the idea that there's always a run on a position in the first round, right? And this year was offensive line, to say the very least. And it started with a couple guys high, and as he kept going later in the draft, eventually teams were really wanting to get their guys. And maybe guys, and I don't say overdraft as a negative light of they didn't belong there, but maybe they went a little bit earlier than you would have thought they did. I'm not saying for the top guys, I'm saying for like the guys later in the first round. But It started early with Will Campbell going to the Patriots out of LSU. And the amazing bite he gave, where basically he's willing to give his life to protect Drake May, which is pretty good soundbite right there, to say the very least. Kind of what you want out of your offensive lineman. Armand Membu going to the Jets at 7th overall, and what their plans are going to be with him, if they're going to convert, if he's going to stay as left tackle in league, or is he maybe going to convert to guard. Will be a conversation we had. I mean, I'm assuming they probably hope he'd be a left tackle, all things considered. But they do have Fashanu from last year, so there's conversations to be had, to say the very least. Kelvin Banks Jr. going to the Saints at 9, which we talked about in the chat with Ryan Ramczyk's retirement, right?
Yeah,
kind of a guy you can slot in right there.
Absolutely.
By the way, also another former Saint retired around the week of the draft. Teron Armstead from the Dolphins, he retired as well. So that probably affected a little bit what the Dolphins did in the later rounds of the draft as well. Tyler Booker going to the Dallas Cowboys, and the jokes that everyone has made. And the jokes that everyone has made there, Rick, that it's just easier for Jerry Jones to remember all those offensive linemen if they have the same first name. So you have 3 Tylers on that offensive line.
Yeah.
So it's going to be.
And that was also replacing retirement, I think, right?
Yes, it was, because Zach Martin retired.
Right.
So it's, again, these Cowboys offensive. Well, it's Tyler Smith, it's Tyler Booker now.
Guyton was Tyler last year. The most penalized offensive lineman in the NFL last year.
Yeah. From the draft 2 years ago, last year, we gave Smith props for, like, he was one of the hits that one of us had.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
From last year draft to this year, Guyton was one of the kind of misses.
Yep.
It's going to go either way for Booker.
Yeah. You can either be Tyler or Tyler. Tyler.
Yeah. Welcome. So we had him go. a little bit of a gap in between to the next pick, but later in the teens, you had at 18th overall, Gray Zabel from North Dakota State go to the Seattle Seahawks. And I gotta appreciate, no matter who the head coach has been all these years, then it's been Schneider as GM the whole time, the Seahawks will continue the time-honored tradition of kind of overdrafting a guy with their first-round pick because they know he's not going to be available later for them in later rounds. Zabel, granted, I think we had him in the first round, if not high second round for us. So not necessarily like
that was one of your picks, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So not like a 20 to 30 pick reach necessarily when I say that, but more so a guy that maybe a slightly higher. I mean, granted, I had him. You mentioned I do have the doc open. I had him as 23rd overall to the Packers.
So. Yeah. So around the same.
Five pick differential. So the Seahawks picked him there. And then you had Donovan Jackson going to the Minnesota Vikings at the 24th pick. Josh Connerly Jr. from Oregon at 29. And then Josh Simmons going to the Kansas City Chiefs, who they and the Eagles swapped picks at the very end. A couple OSU linemen there at the end, Rick. So aside from giving the Kansas City Chiefs a free offensive lineman to develop for the next 4 years, what did you make of the fact that – and we talked about this and we keyed in on it, so it shows we know a little bit what we're talking about here. On the show, we pointed out the trenches, we pointed out the O-line, Rick, and teams very much went O-line in this first round, and teams that needed O-line, they didn't try to get fancy, they didn't think for a pretty decently deep O-line class, they're like, yeah, maybe you could use a second. No, these teams were willing to use first round picks on these guys. So what are your thoughts on the offensive line in the trenches getting a good amount of attention early? I think it accounted for half of the offensive players technically drafted in the first round was linemen, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at every single team that took an offensive lineman here, you can say for certain that they are going to be upgrading a line that needs it or replacing a player that is, probably going to rotate back to the backups and all that. Will Campbell, one of the knocks on him was that his arms are shorter, and obviously, for an offensive lineman, you want to have that quick first step first. So we'll see how he does in that offensive line, but I mean, anything is truly better than Cole Strange, right? For the Jets, Membu, they needed to get younger because you have Tippmann in center who could probably play center and go guard. And then, they had their older guys, their older tackles, but Membu and Fashanu now are two strong tackles as long as they stay healthy. Membu's a raw prospect, but I think he can do pretty well over there. The key for all these teams was also protecting quarterbacks that they may or may not have. Obviously Campbell's there for Drake May, Membu's there for Justin Fields. Well, Kelvin Banks, you don't really know who the quarterback is going to be in New Orleans, but
right.
You have Trevor Penning there. I think Ruiz is still there. Like you said, Ramchick retired. That was a no-brainer. Tyler Booker. I'm sorry, kid. You're going to a bad situation for you. It's not your fault. It really isn't. The Gray Zabel one is interesting because I truly like Seattle's young offensive line with Charles Cross and Abe Lucas and Olu Oluwatimi. You add Zabel there, who was a monster in North Dakota State. That's a really good offensive line for their new quarterback they paid a lot of money for. Sam Darnold.
Maybe briefly with Seattle, could it be the signs of if they feel one of those guys, like if they're going to have to give up on one of them, you hit the reset button with a rookie contract bringing in.
True.
It is a concept to think about.
Well, also remember, too, I think that they're taking a page out of Dallas's book where they want to build up this offensive line because they have a very good duo of running backs.
They do.
When Dallas had Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard as their 1 and their 2, it was behind a really good offensive line. What does Seattle have? Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Yeah. So they've got a really good 1-2 punch in the backfield right there. So build up a really strong offensive line for them, and they're no nonsense team. They can make some noise in the West there. And just keep going on the list. The Josh Connerly one, I know that one got some flack in the ratings. I know analysts said, there were other ways to go than Josh Connerly. But I heard an interview coming home today from Dan Lanning talking about how Connerly is a player who will hold himself accountable in the locker room, number one, but will also hold others accountable. He'll become a leader from day one. And if you remember the Commanders going into that NFC title game, they didn't have Cosby. And that was a big thing for them because that was a nice big piece that they had that they didn't have anymore. So it's always good to add depth because you never know with injuries what things are going to happen there. So, and the Chiefs the same way. Chiefs lose offensive lineman here or there. You got Josh Simmons who can plug and play. So I like a lot of it, and it's smart. It's a smart thing to do to add more offensive line because it's not a skill set. Obviously, when you look at backyard football, for example, the video game, you only have one offensive lineman. It's a 5-on-5. You have a quarterback, a running back, 2 wide receivers, and your center who has the ball, and that's all they do. But in the NFL, you need that offensive line to hold up for your guys, and to have a stronger group that's there, or add another piece, add another body that's there. I think you can't go wrong with it in any facet. So I think that all those teams did a nice job. Again, the Jets, I want to go back to them for a second because this is Becton, Vera Tucker, Tipman, Fashanu, and Membu. Now it's like all they're doing is drafting offensive line. Well, aside from Becton, who's now a Super Bowl winning mammoth guard for Philadelphia, those guys are still there. That's the young core line. They're trying to build up a Kevin Mawai, Jumbo Elliott line again with these guys, and so I think it can work for them. So that's what you want. You want to, because you cannot run plays, you cannot score points if your quarterback is not protected by a good offensive line.
Yep.
That plain and simple.
Yep. And even they didn't use a first round pick on one, but the Bengals with some of their later draft picks, right? They kept drafting the O-line because they understand that the money of the team is in the offense and the money of the team is in Joe Burrow. And you mentioned it, like going with O-line is kind of the way you help your offense win. It sounds like such a basic concept, but then you really tell the difference. I mean, if Justin was here, I know he would bring up the often mentioned trade of when the Seahawks traded Max Unger to the New Orleans Saints for Jimmy Graham, and kind of the Seahawks window started to shut after that trade because their O-line took a significant step back that it really took until the last couple of years of them focusing in the draft to finally build up to a top-tier offensive line again, right? And that Max Unger trade happened in the middle of the 2010s. Like, we're talking about well over half a decade before they finally had a really good O-line again.
I feel like that's Justin's T-shirt contribution, and when we talk about the T-shirts that we're going to sell for our
remember
show,
the Max Unger trade.
Exactly, that's his contribution.
So Justin's is remember the Max Unger trade. Mine, everybody knows this, is that the salary cap is a social construct, or death taxes, and insert your favorite third item here. One of those two. What's yours then? I mean, I feel like we could make $1 million for you.
I would say that mine could just be "Twas the night before Ransomus." ...
That's a pretty good one.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch that we can go back and figure out. Again, I think we can even have comics for other things. Like you can have why was Wheezy there as one, just because it's hilarious.
If we ever become a multi-$100,000 organization, which will start out small, T-shirts would be a comment to say the very least.
Because I mean, in theory, it actually makes sense for this draft weekend that we had. You had Clay Matthews, Jordy Nelson, Mason Crosby, and Wheezy.
Yeah, I literally asked Bars why was Wheezy there, and he texted me back. He's just like he gets invited to just random NFL events. Like it's really spectacular.
I was half expecting to with all the random people that were coming up making picks, just like more random. You forgot they were still alive celebrities. It's like, and here to make the 119th pick for the Cincinnati Bengals is celebrity chef Emeril Lagasse. Like, what? Why?
Why indeed? So I mentioned we pushed away the Giants for a little bit. I mentioned Bars there. Well, let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about the draft that the Giants had. Obviously, they had the 3rd overall pick for themselves, and they selected Abdul Carter, the pass rusher out of Penn State, to be along a defensive line with plenty of talent on it, to say the very least. But the Giants were not done there, to say the very least, as they also traded back up into the draft. Into the first round, I should say, not just into the draft, because, they have plenty there, to say the very least. But they traded back up into the first round with the Houston Texans. The Texans traded the 25th overall pick in exchange for the 34th, 99th overall picks in this class, and a 3rd round pick in next year's draft class. A small price to pay if you want to get what ended up being a quarterback, because the Giants went with a quarterback after all, not the conspiracy theory of waiting another year or so for Arch Manning. No, but they did go with a familiar place, some old stomping grounds. Ole Miss. They get the guy Jackson Dart. Before I throw it to you, Podfather, I got a full breakdown from the man himself, the Godfather of the Gridiron, as I call him. So before we get to the Podfather, let me talk about what the Godfather sent me. That's Bars, of course. And he sent me a full thing for like the full draft as well, so I'll be very quick on this.
Oh, this isn't a video? This is just you reading.
No.
What a slacker! God.
No, I wish.
Might be the alcohol talking. I don't know.
I don't think he had the time. I think he was trying to look for more parlays to put together potentially.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So this was him. So first round, all Giants fans wanted to see was either of the top 2 picks and not a QB named Sanders for the 3rd overall pick. To be fair, accurate. We got arguably the best player in the draft, and more than that, we hopefully got an identity. The Giants haven't had one for years now. This defense is their mark with the pass rusher leading it. Dex, Burns, Carter, Thibs, Golston is arguably the best pass rushing rotation in the league on paper. This is the funny part. Unfortunately, fell asleep before pick 20. That kind of sounds about right. But woke up to the best dream possible. Dart still there, and the Giants drafting him. This was my dream scenario. The Giants executed day 1 in the draft what they needed to do. One can argue Joe Shane has done his job, and his job is safe regardless. Dayball needs to not have this year fall off the tracks, and he has at least a year of immunity, which when you do bring in a rookie quarterback that you hope gets to start at some point, you kind of want to have some offensive consistency for him, to say the very least. So before I get to rounds 2 and 7, let's take what Barr said on the first 2 picks there, Rick. Abdul Carter, obviously, I think everyone on this show would agree was a slam dunk selection there at 3. And getting the best player in the draft, arguably at 3rd overall, is pretty good. But then the trade up for Jackson Dart. So what do you make of that? And then Bars' reactions to it and what it could do for the organization, particularly 2 guys that probably felt a little bit of heat on their seat going into this.
Well, listen, I'm gonna spell it out for you like this. If it was just Jameis Winston and Jackson Dart and Tommy DeVito, I think you'd be in a much better position if you were Daboll and Shane. But there is a certain guy over there who is Mr. Unlimited. And so we'll see how he fares with the rookie QB. Abdul Carter's got a chance to be one of the best pass rushers New York has ever seen. His skill set is top notch, unmatched. It wasn't a position of need, but sometimes that's fine because again, when you have the best guy there, why let him fall to somebody else? Because the odds are, if the Giants didn't take Abdul Carter, one of their division rivals would have swooped up to 4 and taken him. Probably Howie Roseman,
100%,
Philadelphia, because
or the Commanders, realistically.
Oh, true, that's them too. He's such a good player, man. He's so good in the box. His technique is impeccable. He knows where to be. He knows how to get there. He has the explosives to do so. And you pair him, like Barr said, on that line with Lawrence and with Thibodeau and with Brian Burns there. Oh, it makes that Giants defense just so good. And it really just throws a whole wrench into your plan if you're running against them. So that was a no-brainer. Easy A+. I picked the number 1 for a reason because there's not many can't miss prospects. This guy was can't miss. 100% my mind. I had a feeling they were going to trade back up for Jackson Dart. I just didn't know when it was going to be. My thing was that I thought, get ahead of the Rams.
Right.
Because the Rams were probably going to go quarter. And when the Giants did that and topped up to the Texans, that's what helped the Rams back out of the first round for Atlanta. Because yes. I think they would have gone for Jackson Dart as well. And I think Dart was the second QB on everyone's board. The kid is special. He's got a really good head on his shoulders. He's got a very strong ability to throw the ball around the field. I think it's so ironic that the loudmouths in New York sports media decried the pick. What's wrong with taking a quarterback here when you've got Russell and Jameis who can teach him for a year, no pressure on it. And again, it brings you back to the Christian Hackenberg discussion.
Yeah.
Remember when Hackenberg was a sophomore and he was anointed the number 1 overall pick, and everyone said, "Well, wait until he comes out," and then he fell to the 3rd round, and you never saw him again.
Yeah.
It could happen to Arch Manning. It happened to somebody else we'll talk about in a few moments. But
well, also even the concept of playing the kid too early, because it felt like when Hackenberg played, he was really half-baked and probably didn't have a realistic shot. And he himself, I do want to give him credit, he has admitted since his career ended very much so a while ago that he probably would have done him better to stay in college a little bit longer and also just learn more. Whereas I think with Jackson Dart, like the thing for me, and like you mentioned, at the end of the day, Rick, I think we both know this is growing up with New York sports media, is like they're just never happy, and they're always going to critique anything. Even like how many New York sports media members were probably like, Igor Shesterkin, who the heck is this guy replacing Henrik Lundqvist? And they just happen to luck into a top 3 goalie in the league. I think when it comes to Jackson Dart, my favorite quote I read about him, I don't know if you saw this, is that he wants to win at everything. He wants to win at darts. No pun intended. He wants to win at darts. He wants to win at cards. Every little thing. Like, he has that potential psycho-competitive edge that quarterbacks kind of need to have that really helps in this league. And I think we've also seen it around the league to an extent. And this is more, again, the older mindset. But if you are Dayball and Shane, and if you're going for this, I actually think this does help you out. If you consider, look, for the opinions I had when he was drafted, for the opinions to be had of whatever, I think the most obvious thing in the world was that it was perfect for Jordan Love to sit the time he did before he ended up starting. I don't think Jordan Love would be the current Packers quarterback if he started from day one. He was wrong. There was a lot that they had to work on, but they worked on it. Even Eli Manning didn't start right away his rookie season. There was a certain guy called Kurt Warner that was there. In fact, of those 3, Big Ben was the only one that started right away. I think Phillip Rivers did Rivers either not play in 04 or he played at the very end of 04. I don't think he started right away either. So this is an old school technique. It's an old school tactic, but like Jackson Dart doesn't need to play this year. Maybe realistically at the end when the season's lost, putting him in for like 2-3 starts would probably make sense because Michael Penix, like that's what the Falcons did this past year, and actually, accidentally did this year, let's say, and it kind of helped them. Like you can do that if you're the Giants, like when it comes to Dart. So before I continue, Rick, I could tell by the reaction you did some research here.
Rivers was the QB3 on a 4 QB depth chart, with Drew Brees at number 1, Doug Flutie at number 2.
He was still around.
And how about this blast in the past name? Cleo Lemon was number 4.
No.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Cleo Lemon was number 4.
This is a throwback episode.
Well, no, but the thing is too that the thing I liked about it was that the Giants also, whether they meant to do this or not, they also drafted well from guys that know each other well. Because Abdul Carter and Penn State faced Jackson Dart and Ole Miss back in the 2023 Peach Bowl. And there was a play where I think Carter had a strip sack on Dart. And both guys have talked about that play glowingly. And they said, we got a lot of respect for the other guy. And that one, I was trying to do this, trying to do that. He's a great player. Love this. So they were like, get these guys as your teammates. Make them better. They've seen each other. They know it works. Make them better. I don't know whether that was the intention or not. Things fall into place. Again, there's a reason why at this stage, when we did our mock, and I was 4 picks ahead, thank you very much, with Jackson Dart, it was an A. Yeah, because the value there was so good. The value there was so good for it. And the value is so good. And again, he's going to sit. He's going to wait. We've got 1 year of Russ, 2 years of famous Jameis. He's in a good spot for 2027, man.
That is the very underrated thing that a lot of people forget about. Jameis Winston is signed for 2 years with the Giants. Like, this is very much a case where you have a situation where I think this year could be, like I said, remember Mahomes at the end of what was technically his rookie season. He got that little curtain call game at the very end.
Yeah.
You give Dart 1 or 2 of that this year. Next year he's got Jameis. You still have the safety fall back there. Maybe Jameis starts next season. And then there's a succession plan for New York Giants football,
Yeah.
and God knows they haven't had that for ever since Eli left. Essentially,
Yeah.
like if we're drafting Daniel Jones 6 overall, does that? I want to be kind to David Gettleman. He's an elderly man now. Is maybe not the greatest pick, but it wasn't a good pick.
Look, that is true. However, they did hit on Dexter Lawrence in the middle of that first round.
That's true.
They just didn't hit on the first guy or the last guy because DeAndre Baker had that little incident with the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. But as I continue, let me finish up with Barz's analysis on the rest of the draft
please.
here. Good. The rest of the draft in Mara's eyes for certain saved Shane's job. Very big on saving Joe Shane's job here as Bars.
Yeah.
We got depth at D tackle for Dex, which we've desperately needed for a few years. I don't know if he was losing it here. I don't know if he maybe mistyped it. Free the fee clips. I think he was trying to say a guy's name and maybe I don't know if he was talk to texting or autocorrect kind of messed him up. But I'm certain he's probably talking about seeing a few clips of one of the guys they've drafted. I've seen he adds even more to the pass rush as well as a gap filler against the run. We add a power back and Scatabo. Love both picks more because he adds to this hard-nosed, old-school Giants identity. Will he be a great running back? Maybe not, but he will be a good power back to complement Tracy and hopefully create a 1-2. The Giants need more tough guys with emotion. Giants added depth in the later rounds to the offensive line, tight end, cornerback, as well as signing UDFA Notre Dame wideout Bo Collins to the squad as well. So glowing reviews from Bars, to say the very least. And I don't blame him. I think a lot of Giants fans should feel that way. I think this was probably the best draft of the Joe Shane era.
Darius Alexander, that first pick of the third round, adds an incredible motor to this defensive line. And again, depth is huge because you're going to have plays where Dexter's going to have to take a series off here or there, or a time off here or there. So you have Alexander in there to kind of fill the gap. It's perfect. Marcus Embo, the guard they got at Purdue, that's the guy who they immediately are going to put in because they declined on the barn doors with your option. Evan Neal is going to be gone after this year, obviously, which is just what it should be. And Marcus Embo is a phenomenal player for that. Fedone, the tight end they got, he could be a late round gem because Theo Johnson's been pretty good, but Fedone's got some pretty good catch radius there too. And Corey Black, again, you want to add more depth in the secondary. So Corey Black being there is really good. Now, for my guy, Scatty Boo. Let me take you back a couple of years. Do you remember one of the things that made the Giants such a surprise in Daboll's first year? If I have my years correct, one of the things that made them surprise was that the Giants came at you with a 3-pronged running attack. Barkley was your top guy. He was your watch guy, your main guy.
Yep.
Then you had Matt Breida, who was your change of pace, fill in the gap, also runs really well. And then you had Gary Brightwell, who was your later option, but could break off a few plays here or there. I think you have a lot of similarities here between the Killer Bees connection of Barkley, Breida, and Brightwell and your STS Tire and Auto Fan Highway Patrol on FAN of Singletary, Tracy, and Scatabo. Now, where this puts Singletary in that run, I don't know. I think Tracy becomes your feature back because he did so well last year. Singletary is like your secondary option, even though he's definitely being paid a lot more to be your primary option. And then if you need a 3rd and 1 or a 3rd and 2, for now, give Cam the ball and let him just run work. But also, one of the things that really is good about Cam Scatabo is his catch radius out of the backfield. This is a guy who is a vacuum when it comes to catching the ball. And so if Russell Wilson's in trouble and needs a little dump off in the backfield, if you have Scatabo out there, nice and easy. So I think it works really well. I'm very high on this draft too for the Giants. I know a lot of people who are very high on it, and I think that when push comes to shove, if all these guys perform well on the football field, this is going to be a very interesting year for Big Blue football. And I do think it's a year that's going to probably save Shane and Daboll's job if all pans out for them.
Yeah, you can be the 4th seed in the division, but you just have to be respectable.
Mm-hmm.
And realistically, if we believe that the Eagles and the Commanders are potentially two of the top ones at the top of the division again, God, wouldn't it just be comedic to try to force the Cowboys down to fourth place in the NFC East?
I mean, I'm already there because Brian Schottenheimer's a joke. But yeah, I mean, but again, like even that, the Commanders isn't sustainable. That's the question you got to ask yourself.
Right.
And the Eagles, or will they have a Super Bowl hangover here? They might, possible. So in a division where you haven't seen a consecutive winner in 22 years, 23 years, who's to say the Giants may not have added the pieces and may have breaks go their way to be that team that rises in and sneaks in and ends up hosting a playoff game because they won the division, which will make Bars the happiest little better in all of Vegas.
Indeed. Which, by the way, Rick, before we continue, just as a update for you, because we may be seeing a third straight game of the series go to overtime. The Leafs seemingly have tied it 3-3 in the third period against the Ottawa Senators, just so you know. Because we were doing this live as games are happening.
Ah, yes. Hockey!
So 3-3 there. Another game going to OT in that series would be wild. The Leafs sweeping the Senators would also be crazy.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be fun. And also going back to your point with that 2022 season, I nearly said 02 there, but 2022 season for the Giants. While not a lot of high volume for those guys that you mentioned when it came to Breida and Brightwell, worth noting when they got the carries, their yards per attempt mattered and they were efficient. 4.1 for Matt Breida and 4.5 for Brightwell. So
yeah,
it's a big thing there when you get guys that are at least efficient, and that's what you're going to hope can kind of help when it comes to Scatabo, Tracy, and as you said, who could be the third? Who's the third man in that Giants running back room? Before we move on to the next topic, because I think everyone wants us to talk about the main topic of this episode, of course. Just noteworthy because you mentioned how that dart selection could have affected things. A team that traded out of the first round in the Los Angeles Rams with the Atlanta Falcons. The Rams traded the 26th and the 101st picks this year for the 46th pick, the 242nd pick, and a 2026 first round selection. Huh. So that was an interesting trade by the Atlanta Falcons, who all this time, and I called it in the mock of they needed to focus on the defensive side of things. Did not expect trading back in the first round and going for defense to be the thing. Now, I will say I do want to give us a little bit of credit here as we talk about the Falcons. Had a couple hits, to say the very least, in that middle of the draft there, Rick. We had Jalon Walker and Walter Nolan back-to-back between myself and yourself as perfect picks for the Falcons and the Cardinals. So just a little bit of credit for us on that end. And Justin had, I believe, two perfect picks, either both in the first round or one early first and one early second, because he had the Ashton Genty selection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, we had a pretty good draft. It was a pretty respectable mock draft, all things considered.
We kind of know what we're doing a little bit.
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah.
But just noteworthy that they get Jalon Walker, and then they get James Pierce Jr. Out of Tennessee. So getting two guys on a pass rush that, let's be real, it was probably the weakest part of the defense last year, right? Because you have A.J. Terrell, who's such a great corner, and Jesse Bates. That's a very strong secondary to Atlanta. You could argue one of the stronger ones in that division, if we're being honest. The linebacking core, nothing to write home about, but you can kind of forgive your linebacking core as long as the pass rush and the pass coverage is pretty good. It's the problem. The pass rush was not good last year. So they add two extremely young pieces to this core. What did you make that? I think they weren't the last first-round trade. As we know, the Eagles and Chiefs decided to swap with each other the 31st and the 32nd overall picks, with the Eagles taking Buffalo Bills, who could have been a Buffalo Bill, Jihad Campbell. I don't know how, old Sean McDermott let Jihad Campbell escape his grasp, but Eagles get Jihad Campbell, and then 32nd overall, of course, Josh Simmons, next 5-time Pro Bowl offensive right tackle right there, obviously. Of course. But focusing on the Falcons trade before we move on here, Rick, what did you think of this decision by them? Kind of similar when we talked about, that risk of trading a future first. The Falcons are basically doing this. They're banking on having to win the division next year.
Yeah, and the Falcons gave up a pretty penny to move back into the first round for Pierce, because that's the area that they deemed the most noteworthy to fix. because I believe it seemed to them that every other area of their game was fine. And I mean, you could argue for certain spots here or there that didn't really, warrant, that, but they couldn't get to the quarterback, and that's what killed them. They had a very, very good offense. I know somebody in this podcast wanted their offense to be a little bit better, especially for one Bijan Robinson, but beggars can't be choosers. So yeah, they identified a need and they decided to double down on that need. Walker was their main target, obviously, but they loved Pierce as well. And so to get both of those guys creates a nice little, to go back to a Jets thing, John Abraham and Sean Ellis type of mold, where you have two guys who you're drafting in the same round in the same class who can do the same thing but on different sides. And so I get it. It's not flashy. It's not, an ideal thing for teams to do, most teams to do. But again, look at what the Falcons are. They're a defense-heavy team because their head coach, Raheem Morris, shout out Hofstra, is a defense-heavy minded coach. And so he focused on a deficiency. He figured out what the deficiency was, and he made, and with the GM's help, he made the choices that he thinks would help his team out. Now, I can't say that I agree with anything that they did afterwards because they only had 5 picks, and 2 of the next 3 were on safeties, which is like, I don't know, drafting Johnny Flynn and Ricky Rubio back to back. But I don't do that, right? So, but in this instance, I get why they did it. I don't know if I agree with it that much, but I get why they did it. It's not something that I would say that I would do, but it doesn't mean that I don't understand why you did it.
And you kind of go for, well, technically 2 edge rushers. You kind of go for, with James Pierce Jr., who, by the way, 1 pick off compared to the mock because you got him at 27th overall for the Ravens. So we're pretty close on that one.
Damn right.
When it came to James Pierce Jr., kind of the more proven of the 2 in terms of the sack production in college, Jelon Walker is kind of following the mold of a couple of recent Georgia players here who the sack numbers won't burst off the screen for you, but the tape does the talking for what he can do in terms of getting to the quarterback and being a disruptor on the defensive side of things. So you kind of have 2 really good guys there, 2 SEC guys. So they face some of the best talent. It's 2 pretty good selections right there. You couldn't do it. Realistically, honestly, I know they would have missed out on Walker because they picked after, but it's kind of he was raw coming into the draft. The Bengals picking Shamar Stewart for me was kind of you kind of almost wish they would have gone with a James Pierce Jr. or even a Zabel who went the next pick, or even a Derek Harmon, which I want to give a very quick shout out to him and the Steelers pick. First off, not just a good pick by the Steelers, but also, of course, the story I know you've definitely seen it, Rick, of Harmon's mother passing away after he was drafted. And I hope the kid becomes a 10-time Pro Bowler just for a story off of that. I hope to everything that he makes his family and mother already proud of him. He'll only continue to do so. That amazing story. Just the Bengals kind of disappointed me with the selection of Stewart. I kind of talked about it when I picked him in our mock. He's a very raw player. He's coming into this. He's one of the younger players in this draft class as well. 21 years old. Doesn't turn 22 until about midway through the season. So, I guess on one end you can argue he's a good young player, but you're kind of banking on a lot here if you're Cincy. Don't want to get too off track on. Maybe that's a pick that we rediscuss later, or maybe in the next episode when we have Justin with us, because we'll probably talk a little bit more about the draft and maybe more kind of fallout from it. But just a little bit of disappointment there. I think James Pierce in particular could have helped out the Bengals, to say the very least.
Oh yeah, I mean there were definitely other players that I think I would have picked up on that because of how the raw nature of Stewart's game. But again, they saw something on the tape that they liked, and you can't fault somebody for seeing something that they like and seeing a guy that's there and going for it. And you can't fault them for it. You can only question, like we did, why they didn't go for guy X or guy Y, because they believe that their guy was the guy. So
we'll see what ends up happening there, to say the very least. Now, Rick, let's talk about it. And again, we probably will do a second video cleaning up the draft, ladies and gentlemen. So we will bring up a couple more of these picks, and we do have a other notable selection section here coming up in a few. But Rick, let's talk about this guy. Solid college career, right? transferred during his career, played it out, a little bit of success. Rough first season when he transferred, but saw a little bit more success in year 2. Led to more wins, more tape, but ultimately he still fell in the draft. Questions about how high he would be, and he just fell, and he fell, and he fell. But finally, he was drafted to an AFC team. Rick, Quinn Ewers fell to the 7th round in this 2025 draft. And
terrible. Terrible.
What's
funny? What's funny though? He actually didn't transfer. Curtis Rourke transferred. He fell in the 7th round too.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be a lot better. I was surprised with how these quarterbacks fell. Afterwards, because these were guys who I thought were pretty solid. But it's interesting that Quinn Ewers went to Miami. So it's Tua and Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers is Orange Aston Martin from
and other
years ago.
To say the very least. No, okay. Let's talk about the real news here. Unfortunately, or fortunately, Shedeur Sanders, Rick. Where do we even begin, to say the very least, on the Shedeur Sanders saga that ended up playing out right in front of all of our eyes? Picked ultimately 144th overall in the 5th round. Out of Colorado, Shedeur Sanders, the 2024 Johnny Unitas Golden Arm winner, the 2022 Deacon Jones Trophy Award winner, the 2021 Jerry Rice Award recipient, had a decent little college career. I'm not going to argue his number should have been retired, but a decent little college career. I think we all read, as the draft process continued, we saw a video and we read what the analysis was. Decent arm inaccuracy, but nothing spectacular, but decent. Pocket awareness probably needed a little bit more work than even some of the guys that were drafted ahead of him. Well, a lot of guys were actually drafted ahead of him, though, we think about it. There was a lot to talk about. We agreed on the show that while we personally didn't think of him as a high-graded talent, we expected ultimately someone was probably going to take a risk with him in some way, shape, or form. We ended up having him going 9th overall because we thought that the Saints would go that early when it came to a quarterback selection. Now, no. They said, shuck your pick because we're going to go with Tyler Shuck out of Louisville. That definitely came out of nowhere, to say the very least. And we're like, okay, he did go there. Maybe he'll go a couple picks later. Kept falling. Not even drafted in day 2. And the 4th round, I think you had texted it earlier today. He has to go in the 4th round, right? No. He went in the 5th round to the Cleveland Browns, who had already drafted a quarterback in this draft because in the 3rd round they drafted Dylan Gabriel.
Yep.
So I don't know where to begin. There's so much to unpack. And again, I feel like we'll even talk about this a little bit more next week with Justin. Let us try to hit on the big points here, Rick. From what we have both tried to garner from searches and headlines and tweets and all that have you, what do you think ultimately was the case of him falling this far in the draft? Again, we didn't believe in the hype of him being a top 10, top 15 pick. Let's just say, hypothetically, if I'm not saying to the team, let's just say at a baseline. Let's say baseline, he could have been the 26th pick, right? This is a 118 pick differential from that to if that was your baseline. We had him in our mock going 9th. I'm pretty confident saying this is the biggest pick discrepancy from a player in our mock to that.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I'd say so. I can't think of too many triple-digit discrepancies here, to say the very least. So, what do you think? And again, some of this is just we don't know right now, and we may not know until deeper in the off season. We may not even know until he finally gets to start playing some games, right? What do you think was the contributing factors to him dropping this far in the draft?
The realization that the Shedeur Sanders experience was strictly a circus of media entertainment that no team really wanted to be a part of, I think. And even if you if you look at what Andrew Berry, the Browns GM, said about taking Sanders in the 5th round, it wasn't so much. It wasn't him even saying, oh, he was the best player available on our board at the time. We like the fit. We think it's good. He looked at it from, well, it maximizes the value. He looked at Sanders as a number, not as a quarterback. And there's a lot of conjecture and a lot of discussion about how was he in the meetings with these teams? How was he, at reading plays? How was he, at answering questions? Maybe the guy's just a bad test taker, a bad interviewer, and that's what hurt him in the end. But the precipitous drop just stunned me, because it wasn't even so much that, it was more so of like, he dropped and other teams would take quarterbacks ahead of him that I thought were clearly worse prospects. Like, I think you and I were talking much of this weekend about the picks. Justin was a bystander on the train to Hellville. That was his 137 message notifications for what we had. When Milroe got drafted ahead of him, I was stunned.
92nd overall, by the way, for the people, for context, by the Seahawks.
And then not more than 10 picks later, I think it was. So it was definitely less than that.
2 picks later was Dylan Gabriel.
Dylan Gabriel, who goes to the Browns. The Browns who pick up Shedeur Sanders 50-odd picks later. So what's the... And if I'm not wrong about this, which I might be, but there was some report that came out that said that Shedeur would not accept going to Cleveland if that was what was going to happen. At number 2, right? He was trying to force his way to the Giants, but didn't work out. I mean, listen, it's a humbling, humiliating, but humbling experience for Shedeur Sanders. For the Sanders family in general, because not only was Shedeur drafted very low, Shiloh wasn't drafted at all.
Yeah, he signed it, you mentioned earlier, as a UDFA.
Yeah, UDFA. So I think what it means in the long term is that, maybe he gets some time in preseason, but, this is one of those trade bait picks, I feel like, because the conversation about this one was, well, you drafted 2 quarterbacks in this draft. You now have 5 quarterbacks on your draft chart, including Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett.
Yeah,
and Grabby McSalterson, who we're calling him.
Which, granted, because he did re-tear his Achilles, like, there's a fair chance Watson may be out for a majority of the season.
Of course.
So
there's 4. There's 4 healthy.
Yeah.
Healthy, because Flacco's 49. I don't know, but healthy. So, but, you look at the Rams, and Stafford gets hurt in training camp, let's say, and they call the Browns and say, we want Kenny Pickett. That means that you have Flacco, Gabriel, and Sanders. Sanders was up the draft court, Let's say Sanders outplays Gabriel in training camp. He becomes the number 2 behind Flacco. Not necessarily a bad person to sit behind to learn how to play the game in the original Joe Cool, the old school Joe Cool. I played out a different scenario in my head, though, to be honest with you. I'm kind of disappointed this didn't work out. I thought the Chiefs should have taken him. I mean, but then again, they didn't listen to me when I said take Terry McKee, so why the hell is it now? But there was a report that I saw that said, if you take Sanders now as a backup, you have to live with the idea of him being a celebrity backup. This is a guy who has a podcast. He's got a loyal TikTok following. He's got all this, all that. I thought to myself, who better to mitigate that than Andy Reid? Because you're not gonna fire Andy Reid after a year and a half if it doesn't work out, because look at the pedigree that Reid has. You're also not going to usurp the throne of Mahomes.
Definitely not.
But who better to learn from than a multiple-time MVP, multiple-time Super Bowl champion?
Yep.
Again, on a team that somehow made Chase Daniel $42 million for barely playing a snap. And I think the one in 2020, wasn't it Chad Henne that led the game-winning drive against the Browns?
So, yes.
Like, come on. Like that you have an opportunity there to do something really special.
The Chiefs have really made it a thing. Like, they really loved Dolphins backup quarterbacks because they had Matt Moore there even for a spell, and Chad Henne. Like, so I think logic, Ryan Tannehill is probably going to end up being the guy.
Well, I was going to say, I think it before the Steelers, made their overtures and got him, I thought Scott Thompson would have gone there.
They're right.
But it's hard to say why guys fall. But a lot of it, I think, is also driven to overhype of media. With our very first mock draft that we ever did, the very first year that we ever did, we bit into it a little bit with Malik Willis. And look what happened.
We learned.
We learned the hard way. I mean, my thing with Cam Ward, with not taking him first and not taking him at all and watching him fall, wasn't so much an indictment of Cam Ward, even though I made it sound like it was. It was more of an indictment on the fact that there was something about these top two quarterbacks that I just did not like.
Right.
I thought one of them was going to fall. Now, I didn't think it was going to fall down to the 144th overall pick, but somebody every single year, somebody has to fall.
Yep.
And this was the most dramatic fall we've ever seen. I thought it was going to continue all the way to the end. And then I texted you saying, what if the irony is that he becomes Mr. Irrelevant? Yeah. From being a guy who was thought to be number one overall to being number 257.
I was convinced that if he had still been on the board after the 5th round, I thought he was just not going to be drafted at all. Because it's like, at that point, why not?
Well, there are moments too where I saw teams trading back in, and I was like, oh boy, they're going for Sanders. Like when the Jets traded back in, I was on Justin saying, Justin, I'm so sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry what's what happened to you. And I should have, because the receiver that drafted out of Georgia, I'm so sorry that they drafted him instead of somebody else who would be better, Nick Nash. But
But here's the thing though, with drafting a Georgia player to a team like New York, basically guarantees he has to use Uber now.
Well, he could become.
I know the state of New Jersey could still.
But he's a 3rd round pick. He's not making a big salary. He could become an Uber driver, and that's when it's all going to go.
Maybe
crazy. Didn't somebody get arrested in Lincoln Tunnel, a Jets player, years ago?
Probably.
Yeah. So.
No, I'm with you. It's to see this precipitous of a fall. I want for, well, let me say this first off. The people that took this sweet, this sweet vindication of Shedeur falling as if he ever did anything personal to you, get a life, touch some grass, go out to a bar that shows sports. I'm not saying drink, but just like have some wings, make new friends, get off social media, and get over yourself. Hoping that a kid in his 20s, first off, even if he does make it out of camp with being a 5th round pick, he's gonna make more money than you, bro. So just please get over yourself. The people that took this just vindictive attitude, like Shedeur murdered their dogs in their sleep and then turned it into food for them to eat. Like, this isn't some weird South Park bit. Like, Shedeur didn't do anything to you.
Wasn't that Al Snow in The Big Boss Man back in 1999 or something like that?
That as well, probably.
Yeah, okay.
Like, truthfully, get over it. Like, the guys who did the prank call, genuinely speaking, actual pieces of garbage. Like, scumbag human beings. You're not funny. You're not cute. You're a bunch of sickos who don't deserve good things to happen to you.
Correct.
From a purely football perspective, I definitely understood why he wasn't a 1st round pick. It started to be a little bit weird as he kept falling. And I think, like you said, I think the reports, and we always have to take this stuff with a grain of salt. And I think again, I mean, Lord knows we could do a whole just podcast by itself about the topic of, especially when it comes to draft season, the media, whether it's talking up guys or tearing down guys, which that also happened during this draft cycle. Not even just to Shedeur, to all these kids, at some point get put through the ringer. And these, the most annoying thing to me is the anonymous quotes be like, "Oh, I just don't think this guy has what it takes." Put your name on it if you don't think he's that good. Put your name on it if you don't think he's that good. But no, you want to be a coward and you want to be an anonymous assistant coach, an anonymous general manager, an anonymous this, an anonymous that. F your enemy. Anonymity? As I struggle.
Anonymity?
Thank you.
Yes.
Like, F that. See an enemy. Anyways.
Yes.
Like, put your name on it. But no one ever wants to put their name on it. Like, it's the tactics that get used around this time of year, whether it be, well, not just whether it be through the media, are just disgusting. Now, I'm not saying that's the sole reason that Shedeur dropped. Let me make that clear. Because Shedeurly, you can't be serious. Yeah, no, he fell for multiple reasons. Like I said, I kind of mentioned at the start, he's fine. Like, he's a fine enough quarterback. I said before this draft, this felt like a really good backup quarterback draft class. You might only get one long-term starter out of this class. You might get a second if you're lucky. Who's going to be the second? I think Dillon Gabriel makes for a fine backup quarterback. I think Tyler Shuck, with his amazing journey, I hope he becomes a long-term backup quarterback, maybe a spot starter. Like, this was not this was not last year's draft class where 6 quarterbacks went in the first 12 picks.
No.
This was not that. This was always going to be a kind of pick your poison on if you're going to take a chance at. And I want to give NFL teams a little bit of credit here. They've learned from that Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, and Desmond Ridder class, right? To not necessarily overdraft the guys. And they definitely didn't overdraft. They definitely didn't overdraft on Shedeur, to say the very least. So I think I can buy a little bit into like his attitude before with the the pre-draft interviews. I even saw reports saying he was kind of sandbagging when it came to some of the interviews, like his acceptance of like going to certain teams. I think, like you said, ultimately this is a humbling experience for him. Not even just him. Shiloh, I think, kind of understood. I think he always understood that he was kind of like a fringe draft player. He was probably expecting to end up being a UDFA. I think this is a very humbling experience for Deion Sanders. I think he's... Now, I know saying that about Deion Sanders is kind of funny to say the very least, because he also had a couple other Colorado players get drafted this year as well, right? A couple guys in the 6th round, a few wide receivers.
Yeah.
I think this is a humbling experience from him in terms of maybe don't do this to your guys going forward in the future. Especially, I don't know how many more sons he has coming through to play in Colorado, but yeah, right? We have to think about that for a second.
Yeah.
But I think this needs to be a story of, if it's not a top 5 pick like Travis Hunter, maybe don't overflow everything in the media. Like you said, from a PR perspective with Shedeur, all the clips that came out about him, his attitude that was pointed out at times when he was in college, the whole thing with him and his watch, all that stuff, definitely from a attitude perspective and the way you carry yourself, there's confidence, and I believe Shedeur has confidence, but I think what you kind of mentioned, Rick, what is the tipping point for when confidence becomes arrogance, when it becomes ego? And if you are bringing in a guy to start as the backup quarterback, I don't need a backup quarterback that has an ego the size of Timbuktu. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't be confident. I'm not saying that he shouldn't go in there and immediately be motivated to try to take that starting job in Cleveland. Like you said, Grabby McKent keeps him hands to himself is probably out for a majority of the year. There's probably going to be a team or two that is willing to make a trade with the Browns because, again, they still have 4 other quarterbacks on the roster. I think let's not even doubt the fact that Dillon Gabriel could end up being the young guy that gets traded, because I'm sure someone's going to be willing to take a risk on him potentially. But you have Kenny Pickett there as the proven guy who's been around the league for a couple of years. Like, one of those 4 is not making it out of training camp on this team.
Yep.
So now you have a chance, if you're Shedeur, to make an impact for the Browns. And like you said, it's going to be a lot of studying the playbook. It's going to be a lot of being attentive in those meetings. He is going to have to be and I know, take a drink every time you've ever heard this on either an NFL draft or an NFL podcast, but first guy in, last guy out.
Oh.
That is the kind of real quick. Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that is legitimately, no joke, all jokes aside, he has to adopt that mindset for himself, because that might be the only thing that gives him an NFL career past the next 2-3 seasons.
Yeah.
He's not going to have a high leash. He's really not. I almost would argue Shiloh probably is going to have more of a high leash, because you're a UDFA. There are no expectations. If he plays decent enough in the preseason, the Buccaneers might be willing to keep him, especially because it feels like they always get an injury or two in the secondary. So the Bucs probably willing to keep him, at least even in the on the practice squad kind of guy. Like he needs to show up. He needs to show out, but he needs to show up. That's the show up part is the most important thing there. So it's going to be interesting to say the very least what the early stories that are going to come out. And I don't want to be too harsh on him, because we know the media can be piranhas. I'm not saying Cleveland media specifically. I'm saying more national media.
Right.
I hope that the message is keep it simple and don't do anything outlandish. Keep your head down and just put yourself to work. Put yourself to work. Earn the trust of Kevin Stefanski. So that guy knows offense. He's one of those 4 or 5 guys where you're like, if you can't figure out offense with him, then there may be a bigger problem for you.
It's also more so too earning the trust of 2 other guys along with Stefanski. It's earning the trust of their new offensive coordinator, because remember, after this year they fired Ken Dorsey, which is like the going joke now, is that everyone fires Ken Dorsey. It's funny to do. Tommy Reese, the ex Notre Dame guy, is the new OC in Cleveland. So earn his trust. He's 32. He's 10 years older than you. He's been around the block. Earn his trust. And then you have the quarterbacks coach, who is starting to become a legend in the coaching circuits. 21-year veteran Bill Musgrave, who has come through, who has seen everyone basically. Since he's been in the league since 2003, when he was the Jags offensive coordinator. And that was not a fun year for Jacksonville either. But stops in Atlanta, Washington, Philly, Oakland, Denver. He was a Cal for a bit. The guy knows football. Earn his trust. Work as hard as you can. Don't coast on the fact that you have your name. Your name means nothing now. Your name means nothing. So, and also earn the trust of the 2 guys that are ahead of you. And I cannot believe I'm saying this, but it is the truth. Earn the trust of the 2 guys that are ahead of you that are Super Bowl champions, because Kenny Pickett is a Super Bowl champion. Woof. But yeah.
Kenny Pickett's Super Bowl champion. Joe Flacco's a Super Bowl champion. Joe Flacco has also been in the position of a young drafted guy who's taken over a spot on a AFC North team. So, so ultimately, it's going to be a thing. Shedeur Sanders has a lot of goodwill that he needs to start building up. Get to work early. Text Dylan Gabriel, like 2 rookies together. Learn through this with him. Show on the outside that you want to make this a friendly competition, but on the inside, of course, you want to defeat him. Text Joe Flacco, pick his brain, pick Kenny Pickett's brain. Like it's there's a lot of good that can be. Despite everyone wants to make jokes, everyone wants to make memes. It's very easy to do that. Shedeur Sanders has a chance to rip a lot of good out of this, and it's ultimately going to be on his shoulders. I think if he fails out, I don't think you can blame the league. This is now on you to put in the work. It just is. So there's that. There is that. All right, very quickly here, and once again, we probably will do at least a little part of next week's show, continuing to speak on this. But other notable selections that we want to pick out here, Rick, and whether it be guys maybe in the first round we didn't give enough credence to, or maybe a couple second round guys that we talked about them in our mocker, maybe didn't talk about them. I mean, I think late in the process we all learned a little about Tyler Shuck. He goes to the New Orleans Saints. He now joins Archie Manning as the only quarterbacks to ever be drafted in the first 2 rounds by the Saints in franchise history, I think is the post I saw. So what a distinction, to say the very least. So you got those 2 guys, lock in step. But Shuck's there. Luther Baden III went to the Bears at 39th overall, right? Yep. The Ohio State boys, Henderson going to the Patriots, and Judkins going to the Cleveland Browns. Funny enough, Browns, a lot of picks with the trade downs that they made. They made a lot of picks, to say the very least.
They did.
And I didn't mention it with the trade up slash trade down that they did with the Jaguars, but they ended up taking, ironically, a guy who I mocked to them in the draft, Mason Graham. So it's there's a lot of young talent in Cleveland coming into this season.
Oh yeah.
We don't have to go too in depth on this, Podfather, but any other notable selections that happened in this draft as we look at it and kind of preview to next week? Be like, here's the conversations we could continue to have.
Yeah, how about Houston? After flipping the pick with the Giants for Jackson Dart, they take Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, and then what do they do in the following round at 79? They take his teammate Jalen Noel. Because what did the Texans recognize? More weapons for CJ Stroud, please.
Yep.
If these guys are hurt, if Tank Dell's not fully back, give them more weapons. And so, two guys that know how to play. I love that for what I do.
And they also took with the 48th overall pick, Easley out of Minnesota, who I noted was the Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year last season.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good selection right there with a late second round pick.
I also want to go a little bit further into like the trenches a bit in the 6th round, back-to-back picks. One of them by the Texans again, which I know is kind of just like a pity pick in a way, but the fact that the Texans are giving Graham Mertz a shot, I think, is really good because this is a guy who, 6 years in college, tore an ACL. He's really had problems being healthy, but he's got a really good touch, really good frame. He can, be a good scout team guy for the Texans. I think he's a solid enough player. But the guy taken before him by the Lions was the guy that I really wanted to take for the story of it. Ahmed Hassanein from Boise State, the edge. The kid out of Cairo. Such a great story. Refugee coming over from Egypt, comes over, learns how to play football, and dominates at Boise, and goes. You want to talk about a perfect fit? You want to talk about a guy who will do anything for his coach and for his team? You pair this guy with Dan Campbell, I guarantee you, Hassan's making that 53-man roster, and he's going to be a bull for this team. I loved that pick. I really did. And so,
perfect player in a perfect culture kind of pick, eh?
So perfect for them too. And you mentioned Burden, Luka Burden, the Bears pick. Excellent choice by them. You give Caleb Williams another weapon, and Burden is a guy who we had pretty highly rated. So,
oh yeah.
I think that's another guy who we hit on pretty nicely too. So,
yep, we had him 35th overall in the mock. You had him going to the Titans, which made sense. Adding a young weapon in our universe, Will Levis. In real life, it would have been Cam Ward had they made that pick.
Yeah,
but there was a lot of especially in the second round. Like when I was filling this out earlier today, there was a lot of trades that happened in the second and the third round.
Oh yeah,
just teams flipping picks because of some of the previous trades. So that was something. Just to note them, the Carolina Panthers at 114th overall. You want to talk about later round picks there. Trevor Etienne could be a very fantastic, very intriguing pick there. Chuba Hubbard really came out, had a couple decent weeks in fantasy, but you part of me thinks that. Not that no one's safe. I don't want to put it like that, but there's no guarantees with the Panthers right now, right? You're kind of in a position where you need to add guys that you think could help boost the ceiling of this team and help out Bryce Young. Trevor Etienne could be a very interesting selection. It would not surprise me, you mentioned making the opening roster, if he could make the 53-man roster. I think he might have some big playability. He was a decent player. He never had that 1,000-yard season in college, but he was still like a pretty productive running back, to say the very least. I'm very intrigued to see what he could do. And just keeping up with the running backs, we had him go in the first 3 rounds of our mock. Got to give the Browns some more credit here, man. Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee, and with them selecting him, we talked about the Cam Scatterbo selection for the Giants, and that was a great pick for them. Dylan Sampson was another one of those guys I know, particularly like 3 of us had him earmarked in the first 3 rounds, and getting a guy like that. A couple of good offensive selections here in the 4th round by those teams. And I mean, this one, we kind of said as a joke during the course of the mock, because I know I made like a reference to it, but Jalen Royals going to Kansas City. The Chiefs have kind of had a couple issues when it came to early wide receivers and picking them. Maybe a later guy is going to make the difference here. And he had, again, 15 touchdowns in the 2023 season. He was on the Biletnikoff watch list that year. It's a pretty good player. It's not a bad guy to add. So the Kansas City Chiefs, like we kind of talked about them, we'll probably bring them back up here during the course of the offseason when we eventually, in the deep future, talk about the get to the division previews. But Kansas City Chiefs made some smart selections in this class, to say the very least.
It's like the old adage that Paul Levesque must have a singles match at WrestleMania, not a tag team. The Chiefs have to pick a wide receiver at some point in the draft that everyone will be like, why did we let him go to Kansas City? Rose is going to be a real good player for them, man. He's going to be a real good player for that system.
Well, if the Chiefs were following the Paul Levesque current booking strategy, it would be they wouldn't pick one wide receiver. They would put 6 of them in a room, and they'd have to have a 6-man elimination match in order for the winner to end up being picked by them with their draft pick, which
is fair.
Because it can never just be a one-on-one match.
No, never.
Anyways, that moves on again. We'll continue our bit of a draft deep dive next week when we get Justin's perspective. And we'll talk about a couple of the other first-round picks that we may not have gotten to here and comparing a little bit more with some fun with our mock and the real draft. But, of course, guys, you know how we got to end the show. We couldn't end it last week because it was a mock draft. It took a while. But it's back. Don't worry. Everyone's favorite podium, question mark?
Mm-hmm.
Rant and Rick's Roaster Podium is back. Podfather, you know how to do it so well. Take us home into this beautiful, beautiful Saturday night.
How about an NFL draft-themed Rant Podium this evening? Yes, I know. Number 3 on my list is Abdul Carter. Now, I understand that when you're drafted, you're high like that, you're excited, you're kind of off in your own world, you're off doing your own thing. But one of the souring images that I'll remember from this draft was that Abdul Carter refused or just did not, dap up Maxwell Hairston, who was the hype man for everybody who got drafted. And when you watch the video of Abdul Carter, he just gives him the little dismissive head nod. Come on, dude. The guy is happy for every single person. The least you could do is give him a little bit more than just a quick little nonchalant head nod. Maxwell Harrison was the R-Truth of this draft. And, he made everybody feel good about being drafted and all of that. And it was truly a lot of fun seeing him there. But Abdul Carter not doing it, that's the biggest opportunity, man. It really is. You could have endeared yourself really well, and you just didn't do that. So shame on you for not being part of that. Number 2. Pro Football Talk writer Mike Florio. Because the stupidity of the article that you wrote regarding after Shedeur had not been drafted on day 2, when you basically exposed holes in a lot of different things by saying, well, what if Shedeur wanted to go back to college? I don't think he couldn't, but the NCAA had all court trust laws as it is, so he could have gone back and just play for another team, make more NIL money there. You already shot yourself in the foot saying, and it can't happen, but the NCAA is corrupt. Way to knock down the little boy league. Way to knock down the feeder system by saying they're corrupt and they violate their own antitrust laws. So you're just going to break it as it is. Why are you doing that, man? Why are you gaming the system like that? Come up with a better article. Why Shedeur Sanders should have drafted 145 and 141. It's fine. And number 1 on this Rant Podium list has something to do with Shedeur Sanders. And he's going to get some flack, not Shedeur, but this gentleman who's going to get some flack here. Oh, boy. Mel Kiper Jr. Listen. I have an 18-month-old. She's the light of my life. She really is. She's amazing. She's super smart. She's, hilarious, adorable. But now that she's 18 months old, we've entered the phase of life where She's trying to teach. She's trying to say, words to us. She's trying to communicate with us. And her communication now is in the form of banshee screeching. Which, anytime Mel Kiper opens his mouth about Shedeur Sanders, sounds like banshee screeching into a freaking chimney. Like, I get it. You're mad that he wasn't picked number 1, or number 2, or number 10, or number 27. But eventually, you have to, pardon the language here, kids, get off the ride that you're currently on and stop, with the Shedeur love and affection. There's a reason why he wasn't picked until just now, and I'm glad that Reese Davis folded him up into a cheap suitcase and kicked him across the airport terminal in Green Bay like he should have been. Like, I almost want to know how these draft analysts get their jobs. What makes you a draft analyst? What made Field Yates so vitally important to the broadcast this weekend? What? And on top of that, this is a critique for ESPN in general, so Jerry, I apologize. But I don't need 3 different feeds of the broadcast of the draft where one of them, it goes back to the female reporter in a dress that she clearly should not have been wearing, because who dressed you in that? Talking to the mother and father and family of the kids that were drafted. Like, who cares? We want to hear from the kid who got drafted, not the second uncle once removed who played football with him once in a backwoods of Japan. Like, no one wants to hear that story. Come on. Like, stop it. Stop it with the content. Give me one feed of the draft, the interview of the person who got drafted, and that's it. Move on. No need for this other nonsense of, 95 different analysts. I don't need a Fran Fraschilla running for no reason. I don't want that. The only analysis that I will accept from this point forward is Nick Saban's. And what a world that we're in that I'm giving Nick Saban any kind of props and praise. But I do enjoy the fact that when he was talking about the Michigan guys, he was like, yeah, we tried to stop them. Didn't work. Like, you know what, Nick? Great analysis. I love it because it's accurate. And it's accurate from someone who was actually there and tried to do something about Mason Graham, and it didn't work out for him. Or Kenneth Grant, and it didn't work out for him either.
It's like, Nick, who do you think are the best interior defensive linemen in this draft class? It's like, you see those Michigan boys? Yeah, those two. They retired me.
It's that war flashback of, like, those guys.
His Fortunate Son plays in his head when he has to do that breakdown tape.
Oh, Fortunate Son. What a terrible song.
Hey. That was the Warzone anthem during COVID for victory for me and my friends.
That was also the Warzone anthem on Family Guy in that one episode because it was just like the running joke. That was all you ever heard was Fortunate Son. Nothing against Sean Fogarty. Love his music. But like that song, Centerfield's better. Just saying.
With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Sports Agents of Chaos podcast. Just a 2-man show this time. Don't worry, Justin will be back here soon enough. Because I know that people miss him whenever he misses these episodes. But we talked a good amount of draft here. I feel like we hit the big storylines here. We will be back next week to kind of clean up the draft. Maybe talk a little bit more. Rick, this was like a very rumor-heavy draft going into it. And I think we maybe could address, like, again, kind of like the speculation of Tyreek Hill. I know I mentioned Jair Alexander and his shaky future in Green Bay. Is kind of those things that should be interesting. Maybe as a like very brief like look ahead of like what could be like the following storylines for the rest of the offseason. We might do something a little bit of a hybrid episode next week, but it'll be a good one, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this on our initial draft recap. This was the immediately following it. We're going to let it marinate a little bit, and we'll see what our thoughts are going forward. And for a little bit more fun, we'll do much more comparing of the first 3 rounds of the actual draft and what our mock draft ended up like next week. I mean, Rick just mentioned what to qualify someone as a mock, as a draft analyst. I think after our mock this year, I think we did a pretty good job, Rick. I think we did a pretty good job. So thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of Fun Football Chaos. And we'll see you guys next time as we continue to talk about the draft and then look ahead with a little bit more of the NFL offseason. To you, beautiful, beautiful people, take care, have a good night, and bye-bye.